I'm Chance Dorland, and welcome to the Oink Only in Korea podcast, brought to you by KoreaFM.net, an online radio station featuring independent musicians and original podcast content from the Korean Peninsula. As always, I'm joined by Travis Hull, the man behind the Only in Korea Facebook group. And Travis, how was the week?
It's been an interesting week this week. It's my last week of vacation, and then I start work again next Monday.
The dream ends.
Yeah, but then it's like Monday is a work day, and then we have a vacation on Tuesday. So it's kind of like typical Korean scheduling, I guess. Like, come to work for one day and have another day off.
Well, I don't know. You'll have a little bit of a break and then go back to the grind. You've had quite a large vacation. It's about damn time.
I have had a nice long vacation. Also, this week I received my first death threat via Oink from some crazy netizen. So that I've kind of been dealing with like fallout from that, which is
what's the death threat? Please share, Travis. It is the Oink podcast.
Some guy was upset with my views on. I think he was upset by the fact that I posted an article that said that Americans fear North Korea more than ISIS. So I think he thought I was
I saw
sympathizer.
That. Yeah.
So he was threatening to slit my throat and stuff in English. Just totally crazy. I reported,
but like in plain sight on the
in plain sight on his Facebook while he was sharing my like background image and saying he was going to murder me and stuff. So I reported it to Facebook, of course, and they did nothing. So I mean, I pretty much blocked the guy from Oink, but you do meet a wide variety of characters with a lot of different opinions when you're...
Is this someone who's known in the group that other people know, or just a random...
He's been in the group for 6 months. No problems or no issues with the guy before.
But I mean, like, other people know him? He's not just someone that no one knows?
Yeah, he had 6 like mutual friends with me, but he would seem like a used car salesman here in Korea, and he deals with foreigners. And some person had posted, screenshots of him also behaving kind of similarly, but not threatening to kill anyone, but behaving like very rudely to his customers. So it just seemed like he kind of was like a loose cannon. But I mean, it's not certainly the first like weird person we've had in Oink, but it's like the first person we've ever had who's like directly threatened to kill me based on like misperceiving my political views. Just totally out.
Well, Mazel Tov, my friend. That's first time.
Yeah, you're doing something right. I guess you're doing something right if you're getting people to like worked up into enough tizzy to like want to kill you, but not.
Well, maybe we have different versions of success. I wouldn't call that success, but to each his own, Travis. Well, best of luck. Hopefully nothing happens to you, but you heard it first, folks. If anything happens, if you get hit by a car, it's not an accident. Let's just remember that. If he's poisoned, hit by a car, anything, brick falls on his head, not an accident.
Yeah, so it's been an interesting week. Anyway, I'm happy to get back to work here. I'm getting bored actually with being on vacation. I know that's like not a problem with most people in Korea, but it is. I mean, it gets old, so it's time to get back to work.
Well, Travis, when one's bored or when one needs to let off some steam, from the fear of being murdered by someone from an online community, in South Korea, in Seoul specifically, perhaps one could go clubbing, but not so fast. Today, we're talking about discrimination in South Korea, and that's because the Korea Herald recently published a story titled "Korean-Only Bars Trigger Controversy." But, if you lived here in Korea, if you have a friend here in Korea, if you can read, really, it's not controversial, and it's really not that much of a news item. It doesn't get played up as much in the Korean media as it probably should. And as we'll probably mention later on, these types of stories have been picked up by some media outlets, notably the Korea Observer. But as it's actually not illegal to discriminate against customers here in Korea, more or less it's perfectly protected to say you don't want someone in your business or you don't want to do business with someone. The story reemerges from time to time. And this is the current one that's pushing it back up into everyone's eyes. It's about a Hongdae bar named Green Light. And once again, this is all from the Korea Herald story that had a sign that said, quote, "Only Koreans are allowed because our employees are not able to communicate in English. It's not racist. Sorry. Please be generous about it." End quotes. However, the Korea Herald reports that when a 24-year-old American who spoke to staff members in Korean asked if she could get in, she was still told that she wasn't allowed. One of the bouncers guarding the door then told the Korea Herald that it was not their intention to discriminate against foreigners, but rather it was their business policy to attract Korean patrons only. So, just like we've done in the past, Travis, we had a poll in the Only in Korea Facebook group, and why don't you go through some of those top responses? This was a very commented on, and a lot of people voted in this poll.
Yep. I think people even left the group over this poll, actually, based on some of one of the replies I'm seeing here. But I know the person's left and come back once before, so I don't think it was maybe this.
You'll be back.
Yeah, maybe he was offended. Overall, I mean, people were, and again, this is an expat-based group, so a lot of the commenters are going to be expats. But we had, over 100 responses to our poll, I think, and 63 of them. I mean, it's kind of swearing. This shit would never fly in the West. Koreans constantly cry racism when it happens to them, but overlook it when they are being racist. And then the second most popular response, the first one got 67 votes, and the second one, which got over 40 votes, I think got like 42 votes, said Korea needs to strengthen its anti-discrimination laws in response to these bans. And then the third up, the comment was basically, these bars and clubs aren't worth visiting, so move on and spend your money where you're welcome. And that got like around 21 likes. So people did seem to be in disagreement with this discrimination or perceived discrimination. But a minority opinion, which got over, I think 12 votes, said businesses have the right to decide who they want to allow into their establishments. So people were pretty much resoundingly against these bans, and they thought they were racist and discriminatory. But at the same time, there was a minority of people who did feel it was in the right of these businesses to allow who they want into their bars.
And we'll get to some interesting comments, as we always do when we have these polls. But let's kind of talk about where we identify with. As an American, you and I, as we've mentioned before, we're both kind of Midwesterners. I'm from Iowa. You're from South Dakota, North Dakota?
South Dakota.
South Dakota. The good Dakota. The better Dakota.
Yeah, the best Dakota.
The best Dakota. There's only one Iowa. So I'm just kind of generalizing here, but I think probably you experienced this as well. Growing up in the Midwest in Iowa, and I assume probably in South Dakota, you're kind of taught that you have certain rights, and it's important to keep the government from telling you what to do in certain situations. Freedom, isn't free. Freedom must be paid for with the blood of patriots from time to time, that type of stuff. I mean, I remember hearing that, when I was a little kid. So there's a part of me that is always against private business being told what to do by the government, even though I'm progressive in a lot of ways, pro-marriage equality. I support Bernie Sanders, all these different things. I'm pro, marijuana legislation, things like that. Let's make it legal and tax it and make a bunch of money to pay for programs. At the same time, I do think businesses have a right to a certain extent to say whether or not they want to, employ certain people, or if they want to do business with certain people. Now, I don't know exactly where that line is, but for example, where I come from, there are, a decent amount of Catholic schools. And in Des Moines, there's a Catholic school called Dowling Catholic. It's a very well-known school in the area. I have some friends who went there. They were under fire sometime in the last couple of years because they fired a teacher because the teacher was there for like a year, and after being there for a year came out as gay. I believe this is what happened, something like that. And the teacher was let go. Now, that's really bad, and I don't support that decision. But if you're a religious organization, and if someone is perceived to be going against part of the religion that you stand for and try to promote to your students, I think that there is perhaps a right for, a school to say that's not something we want, our students to be taught. Now, I don't agree with that, but I wouldn't send my kid to a Catholic school either. So, I think in that case, it's bad, and I don't support it, and I would not want to send my kid to Dowling Catholic, but I think that people should have the right to send their child to a school where they agree with, the religion and the lifestyle choices of their teachers. Now, when it comes to government, absolutely not. Government institute can't do anything like that. So when you have a private club here in South Korea, obviously it's a different culture, it's a different legal system, blah, 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 blah. it sucks. I'm a foreigner, and I don't want to have people tell me what to do, but I think that there's a little bit of a case to be made for certain situations, private entities being able to cater to a certain group or being able to not cater to another group. That being said, I support human rights laws, and I support not discriminating against people. So I would love to see Korea pass some laws that would prevent this type of thing. But at the same time, I'm kind of torn. I can see both sides of this.
Well, and I mean, I think there's a bit of hypocrisy in the statement from the people who commented that this shit would never fly in the West, because it does fly in the West, and it has been going on, for decades. If you look, now I'm going to quote a TV show, which is a little bit, I mean, I guess it's kind of a lame example, but if you look at the latest season of Fargo, which was supposed to be filmed in South Dakota, he was a Native American character, was very unwelcome. They were very unwelcoming towards him in a perceived white guy bar. I think they had it marked. The bar was marked that a certain number of Sioux Indians had died at this location in a certain battle. It was supposed to be in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So the guy went into the bar. He ends up killing everyone in the bar. But it was like the scene where he's going through this racism, that was supposed to be in the 1970s. And it's still going on to some extent today. I'm sure there's like skinhead bars where a Korean person who's visiting America would feel very, very, very uncomfortable in the South.
But to counter that, while I agree, he used a TV show, but I have seen reports of people of color going into a certain type of establishment and being mistreated, and it became a big news story, and the owners of the establishment were kind of, their names were dragged through the mud, and as they should have been. That's a horrible thing to do to someone. The difference is that in the West, at least in the United States, once this was known, once it hit social media, and once it was picked up by news agencies, it would be quite a big story, and people would make a lot of fuss about it, as they should. And, there would be a lot of consequences. This type of thing happens in Korea, and there are no consequences because, once again, it's legal. So I think there is some truth to the fact that it wouldn't fly in the West. At least it would fly less likely.
It's legal under the guise of laws that are set up to favor, they instead of discriminating against race, now they'll discriminate against class by setting prices, right? I mean, I think the argument the foreigners are making here is these bars are dives.
It happens indirectly, but in South Korea it's much more direct.
Yeah, it's like, why aren't you letting us into the dive bar? I mean, if it's an exclusive club, sure, I could understand that, but it's the point that I think a lot of foreigners are making is why aren't they letting us in? It's a dive anyway. It's a dive bar. And so what's the problem with us coming in there? I mean, I can see that point, and I can also see it from the business's perspective that they just don't want to deal with foreigners. A lot of the articles that I read, which Taehoon did a very good job with the Korea Observer. I think him and James Himes did a really good job covering this.
Previous instances of this.
Yeah, I mean, they covered like 4 or 5 examples, but these business owners, some of them legitimately didn't, they wanted to be able to pick the clientele that they wanted. They had no idea they were being racist. I mean, as far as I could tell, some of them clearly were, because they were targeting like Middle Easterners and, targeting people from specific countries. But some of them were just like, I prefer to have Korean customers. And if it's in a Korean area, I can understand that. I can understand that. But I mean, I think to say that it doesn't go on the West, it does. It's a little more hidden, and I think a lot of people in the media isn't probably covering that. Who's going to skinhead bars and writing about these people in the States? That they probably exist, but no one's covering it.
And before we get any further in the discussion, I want to play for you a voice message that we got specifically about this topic. Travis and I didn't include this when we recorded the episode, but we have it, and we're very happy that we do have it, as it gives a very interesting perspective on one foreigner and his thoughts on being told that he wouldn't be able to go to a business here in South Korea. If you want to leave us a voicemail message for any topic that we've covered in the past or anything that we're working on currently, we always post our topics in the Only in Korea Facebook group, and you can record a message with your computer, with your phone, and it might not sound like it, but I have changed the pitch on this, so you wouldn't recognize this person if you met him in real life, even though the audio you're about to hear does sound conversational, so you can remain anonymous if you leave us a voicemail message. Here's his message, and then Travis and I will jump back into the discussion.
Yeah, this is something that's always really bothered me a lot. Firstly, philosophically, that there are businesses that people can't go in just because they they're foreigners. When personally, I own business here. I own a house. I have a car, and it's just strange that any 19-year-old Korean can go into this place, but I pay a bunch of taxes and I'm a big part of society, and I actually employ Koreans, and I'm not allowed in, and I find that really strange. But it doesn't really bother me so much because I do follow the philosophy that I don't want to go to these places to begin with. But it really bothers me in general because I have a son now, and without there being anti-discrimination laws, my wife doesn't worry so much. She's Korean, but I don't think she quite gets it. And I worry about his future as a half-Korean because already, especially young people, and even you'd be surprised, older children and even adults act like he's not Korean sometimes. And I think that's due to the fact that there's a poor understanding of what it means to be Korean. And that, it's definitely, people can say whatever they want, but the way you look has a lot to do with it. So we have to get anti-discrimination laws for the children.
So what were some interesting comments that came out of this specifically that you would like to talk about?
Okay, I like this one. This guy did leave the group. I'm not sure why he left, but I like this comment. Okay, it says, "My 2 cents. Not that anyone cares. There are hundreds of bars."
Let me just start off. No one cares. Go on.
Well, he says there are hundreds of bars and clubs to go to, and foreigners wouldn't think twice about going to this one except that they're not allowed to. Now it's got that sweet exclusive allure to it. Straight up, Korean and Americans have different cultures when it comes to going out, getting drunk, and socializing. American men, which I'm sure they're most afraid of, are much more direct when hitting on women. And a lot of these comments by these bar owners were saying, yeah, the foreigners are being more aggressive with the women than Korean men would have been. So there could be some sort of cultural difference there that isn't fully being explored. Or before we get out the pitchforks, there's differences in drinking culture that are at play. So it's a complex issue actually.
My response to that would be then, okay, if you're going to say that it's because, I'm not agreeing to this, but, let's just say, okay, you're saying it's because foreign men are more aggressive, the drinking culture is different, this, that, or the other. Okay, then I'll call your bluff. Write that on the sign. Say that we only want to cater to Korean customers, or say we're afraid that foreign customers are going to cause problems because of their interactions with women or because they're going to drink too much. I think people see a little bit of hypocrisy when they say something such as, in this case, our employees are not able to communicate in English, and then a foreigner who speaks Korean asks if she can come in and they say no. So if there's a reason, whether or not you agree with it, if it's a reason, at least, okay, there we have a reason. But the reason in this specific case doesn't seem to really be there.
Well, at least in this particular case that the Korea Herald mentioned, at least they're apologizing. It's not racist. Sorry. They don't want to, their English isn't good enough to explain their reasoning on this, but I agree.
What? No, if they can write a sign.
There has to be a reason for it, and it's not hard really to come up with the reason if you really don't want foreigners there. You can't. The thing is, you can't target. I think they shouldn't be able to target specific races to not come in. It should be across the board. So I think some people were complaining like, well, if you look Korean, you can get in. But okay, get this. My friend lives in LA, and he said that there are in Koreatown, there are bars in Koreatown that I would never be able to get into unless I went with him. So, it does go on in the States, too. So, I don't think it's just a problem that's exclusive to Korea, and it doesn't really bother me because I don't want to go to these places anyway. I know the places I want to go to.
Yeah, and I'm sure that came up in the comments that, I'll take my business elsewhere. But, this, of course, is not the only place where foreigners feel discriminated against, or where the news has reported discrimination against foreigners. And we often forget, as both Westerners, you and I, and English speakers, there are a lot of Asian
foreigners who live here in South Korea, and so there's a lot of instances of discrimination that might not enter into the sphere of a Westerner who's talking about all the things that go wrong for foreigners here in South Korea. So it does set somewhat of a precedence if you allow this. I hate using the slippery slope argument, but with something like this, I think it's easy for a decently logical person to see how this could either lead to other things or at least make it easier for other things to exist. Well, if this exists, then this has to be able to exist as well.
Well, I mean, and some of the people were saying, well, if this is your biggest problem, like look at some of the migrant workers here who are coming from poorer countries, and look at how they get treated in Korea. It's a widespread issue in Korean society. Racism is an issue here that needs to be addressed. Although I'm not so sure that this is the particular issue that really needs to be addressed. There's bigger issues out there.
There are much easily found issues in this area that could really use some work aside from this. But this is something that affects the English speaking crowd, and they're kind of like privileged foreigners in South Korea. So of course this gets picked up.
Yeah, it does come back up again from time to time. Every couple of months you see an article like this, and the usual shitstorm ensues for a few weeks, then it kind of dies out, and then people 6 months later, 3 months later, people will pick it back up again and be enraged about it again. So it comes up again and again.
So then, since we've already made the case that it comes up from time to time, I don't think anything is going to happen with this particular incident. As we saw before, when JR Pub or Junior Pub, I never know how to say that. JR Pub in Itaewon during the whole Ebola thing that was going on around the entire world. They had up a sign, don't quote me on the exact words, but something like "No Africans." But then someone who was a white, Caucasian African was allowed in. She showed her ID. And once again, don't quote me on the exact details, but that was the general gist of the story. And then they were very quick to apologize and say that, it was a misunderstanding. But this was a very high-profile case, and nothing really changed afterwards.
Yeah, that guy kind of tried to make it right. Like he basically said he was clueless, which I don't know if I believed or not. But that was his excuse. And then to make it right, he tried to offer, I think it was free drinks. He did free drinks for a night and a side for the table. But, I mean, not too many people really were there to take advantage of it. I think, people were kind of like avoiding his business at that time. So it was a bad PR move on his part. And I don't know if I necessarily felt bad for him, but after speaking to him, I just felt like he was just an ignorant person. I mean, that was the only, I didn't feel it was like a malicious thing. I felt it was like ignorance.
So then what's the solution then? Do you think that it's to educate business owners or people working in this industry as opposed to some sort of law? Because I don't see the law changing anytime soon in South Korea. Or do you think it is what it is and it's just going to keep going? And, there are other places where people can spend their time and their money.
That's going to be part of it. The businesses that are going to succeed are going to be the businesses that invite everyone and want customers, right? I mean, that's how you make money as business. So the people that learn that quicker are going to make more money, which is what you're in business to do.
There are far more Koreans than there are of anyone else in South Korea. So I think you can still be a successful business and
pool, right? So the bar, a lot of restaurants in Itaewon, foreigners make those places famous, right? Like they become famous in the foreign community, and the Koreans pick up on it. Our local media picks up on it. But if foreigners pick up on these places really quickly that are good and that are serving quality food and good service, so. It is. I mean, I think it's important to treat everyone equally as a business if you're interested, in profiting. But
I think it's easy to see that you could not do that and still, because there are places that are infamous for this in different cities, not just here in Seoul, but in other parts of the country, and they've been in business.
You'd be considered scummy among the foreign community. I mean, we're not a small community. I mean, if you can constantly fill your restaurant. I mean, I'm going to give an example of a place that I think does it really well is like Linus Barbecue. Foreigners really know this place because they do a good service there and they treat even though it's popular among Koreans and foreigners. So if your restaurant's always full, you're doing something right. And I think, foreigners, especially in the Itaewon area, are a huge part of that.
Well, I don't know. I don't mean to rain on your parade, but I think it's very easy to show that you could still discriminate against anyone you want, really, as is more or less legal in South Korea, and it's not going to affect the bottom line too much.
It might in like a place like Itaewon or Hongdae, but in a place like, I think one of the articles like Annam or something, and probably you could get away with it really easily because there's not very many foreigners, so most of your business is going to be Koreans. So yeah, it really depends on the area, but I mean, if you're operating in the Itaewon or Hongdae area, you would think it would be, in your best interest to draw in as many people as you could. I mean, in Myeongdong, like I was walking around there today, and all those signs in Chinese and all these businesses and stuff, like they really want that money. I mean, so you can't be operating a shop in Myeongdong and be like, no Chinese people, please. I mean, there's millions of them. They're a huge part of the economy down there.
I think we've only really brought up the one comment that started with the person saying that no one's going to care what he or she had to say. This is probably the most popular poll we've ever done. And as you mentioned, I think a couple of people you said might have left the group over it. So what were some of the other comments that you thought were worth sharing, or at least people seem to either agree or disagree with heavily?
As I mentioned, that number one was like, that shit would never fly in the West. And then someone commented, except when it does. And then they brought in like someone brought up an example from London that said only white guys allowed. Heard not in one but two clubs in Chelsea, London last night. This is like from January 10th of this year. So I guess people are saying it does happen in the West. Another guy commented that back in the 80s when they were working in Seattle, there were still bars that wouldn't allow American Indian customers, and this is over 15 years after the Civil Rights Movement. So, I mean, it did seem that, like, people were kind of willing to call out the West and their own hypocrisy. And
I don't know, man. I have a lot of problems with the United States. I would like to see a lot of things change, and I think we have a history that is often forgotten and not taught because, we would really just be ashamed of ourselves if we really owned up to all the horrible things that happened and, continue to happen. But I really think it's a little different if a bar or something in the States does that today than in Korea today, because once again, Korea, it just happens all the time, and then people forget about it, and then it happens again, and then people are like all up in arms, but nothing changes. I mean, it's perfectly legal here.
It's legal. That's why it's like, it's not a problem, because it's not illegal for them to be doing that, and in the States, I mean, it probably does happen, but it's more of an issue because it's actually illegal. You could sue someone for doing that. You could.
Yeah, there's no recourse here. The most you can hope to do is drive someone out of business and shame them publicly. But I really think I've already made the case that doesn't happen.
No, these places stay open. Like there's a place that another kind of interesting thing. One of the he's a journalist here. I'll just mention him. A journalist who's kind of covered this in Seoul. He posted 2 event flyers from a place called Club Fix, and they use white women to market white women and men to market their club, and they don't allow foreigners in. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
See, I'm not familiar with Club Fix, so they have a sign, or they don't let you in if you try to go in?
He claimed that he tried to go there, and that I think Taehoon covered this one as well, Taehoon Lee from the Korea Observer. But he claimed he tried to go there and that they allowed his Gyopo friends to go in, but not him. And like 98% of their flyers they're using Western people to advertise their events, but they don't let foreigners in.
See, this is what you talked about earlier. You said these restaurants, they become popular because they're popular with Westerners, so they need to let Westerners in. But this is what I'm saying, is that they can use that popularity, or at least fake that popularity, by putting Westerners on their flyers and then just let no one in. I mean, it's an obvious example. And once again, I'm not familiar with this, so I don't know specifically what's going on here. But you said someone posted, who's a journalist here, who claims that went in and he tried to get in as a Westerner, and they wouldn't let him in. But some Gyopo, so like Korean American or Korean Canadian, Korean Australians, ethnically Korean people, were able to go in.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like just an absurd example of it. But you do, like, it's something you come across here as a foreigner if you live in Korea long enough. We've all experienced being denied entry to a establishment. I mean, it's something you just kind of...
I maybe I don't go out enough. I've never been told I can't go somewhere, but I have plenty of friends, acquaintances who have told me that it's happened to them, or they have friends that it's happened to. So, a couple degrees of separation.
it wouldn't be necessarily just a Korean thing either. I think it's more it's an Eastern Asian thing too. I mean, if you lived in Japan or if you lived in some parts of China, there are places in bars and restaurants that they're not wanting foreigners to go to, and you would experience the same thing living in one of those countries. So I don't think it's like necessarily even oink. You know, it's not like only in Korea. It's something that happens all over East Asia.
But you lived in Cambodia. Did you ever hear anything like this in Cambodia?
Yeah, not really, but I felt, there were places you could go to in Cambodia. Like if you like my local neighborhood wasn't a foreign neighborhood. It was like a very combined neighborhood, and there were restaurants. I mean, I'd try to venture around and eat at different places, but there were places that you'd go to that you just didn't feel comfortable as a foreigner, and it would either be because they felt uncomfortable speaking English, or they just didn't want you in their place. So there are places like that down there too. But I think it's more pronounced in Korea. They weren't outright banning people in Cambodia. So, but I'm guessing if you were in Japan, and I've heard from expats living in Japan that this kind of stuff goes on, probably to a larger degree in Japan than it even does in Korea.
I've never lived anywhere else in Asia. I lived in Germany for a year. As I mentioned, probably before on this podcast, I was a Peace Corps volunteer. Yeah, I've mentioned this. Peace Corps volunteer in Colombia for about 2 years. Didn't really club in Colombia too much, though I did. We lived in a very metropolitan area, city of 2 million people. Poor areas as well as rich areas, but there were places to go. Never heard of anything like that, not being able to go in somewhere. Never heard of anything like that in Berlin. Once again, not saying it didn't exist in Berlin or it didn't exist where I lived in Colombia, but I just never heard of it. Here, it's just very well known. You hear about it a lot.
It's a similar deal as probably as you were experiencing in Colombia. Like they pretty much, I've never been discriminated. Like I felt that Cambodians are very welcoming towards foreigners. The ties too somewhat, but there are places that you wouldn't go to because it's so poor that you would feel for your safety going there. So that, it's not discrimination. It's just,
but I've never, once again, to show how different South Korea is, I couldn't think of an area in South Korea, at least here in Seoul, that I wouldn't want to go to for that reason.
Yeah, there's not a part of, as a guy, probably, there's not a part of the city that you would feel at danger in. There are places you might feel a little bit uncomfortable, and there might not be very many foreigners. I remember my friend came to visit, and we were riding up to like the northern end of Seoul, like the end of Line 4, and there was this Korean guy staring at him, and he was like, felt uncomfortable. He's like, why is that guy staring at me? And I'm like, probably doesn't see very many foreigners up here. Like, we were up like Dangoge, I was like, just stare at him back, just look at him back.
And how did that finish? Just staring and nothing happened?
Just awkward, yeah, staring at each other for a bit, and then we got off the train, and he got off the train, so yeah.
Well, that's a great story, Travis. Please share stories like that in the future.
Well, that kind of, those kind of, I think you probably experienced something like that where you felt like someone is a little bit, staring at you.
I've been stared at more than a few times on the subway. My girlfriend's Korean, and like kissing her on the subway on the cheek, or holding her hand, or just like talking with her. And
have you ever been called out for that?
No, I saw the video that the Korea Observer posted one time. An older Korean man, basically, harassing some foreigners, but I've never, I've had some older Koreans give me what I would call kind of like a dirty look. Not quite sure why, but I was standing next to my girlfriend, and it was obvious we were together. So I just put 2 and 2 together and figured out it probably equaled 4.
I've experienced those situations here in Korea. I had a guy who I don't know what his problem was, but I was speaking in English on the telephone with my mom, and he got very angry with me that I was speaking English. So of course I moved to the next car just to avoid him.
Did he follow you?
Yeah. Yeah, he followed me to like 2 or 3 cars.
Strong
and by the end
move.
of it, he's like shouting at me, and then I'm like cursing at him in Korean at the top of my lungs. So everyone in the car, I've walked through 3 or 4 cars at this point to avoid this maniac. And everyone in the car, the last car, they're going to think it's the crazy foreigner car.
Yeah, they don't see.
But it was really like some like drunk guy who was just had a problem with foreigners. So that you do experience that kind of stuff too in Korean society, which is it's not related to the bars.
Here's the thing though, unlike my previous comments where you're talking about the hypocrisy, I don't think a bar discriminating against foreigners in Korea is the same thing as one discriminating against foreigners in the United States, or people of color, whatever it would be, because of the reasons we've already discussed. But I will fully admit, because it's perfectly true, that in the United States there, I think, are plenty of instances where a mixed race couple or a foreigner couple or whatever you want to do, insert the people into that area or in a public place, and they could be hassled. I think that could happen in the States anytime.
Yeah, I think it could. I mean, it would really depend on where you were in the States, but it definitely could. I mean, I wouldn't say that wouldn't be something that you might face as
a possibility. I'm not saying it's going to be the norm, but if it did happen, I read about it, I would not be shocked.
No, I wouldn't be shocked by that either. I think my friend actually told me that his brother is a white guy and he was marrying a black woman, and they were up in Minnesota for the wedding.
Oh, not Minnesota.
And some person
it's the progressive. It's a progressive oasis of the Midwest.
Yeah, like some person like drove up to them, flipped them off, and like shouted out like a racial epithet at the woman. So I mean, like that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, that happens in the States too.
Yeah, unfortunately, it does. But once again, just the final point here. Let's wrap things up. If a restaurant or bar did the things that are getting reported regularly here in Seoul regarding not letting foreigners in, there would be hell to pay. And that's not the case here in South Korea. And once again, I've already pointed out how I think that businesses have, to a certain extent, some rights or something about who they want to cater to. And at the same time, I still think there should be some more legislation here in South Korea to protect people from discrimination. In the United States, those people, I don't see them being in business very long, and I think they would lose their pants in a lawsuit, if not some sort of legal something.
I mean, but the thing is, in the States too, like I think it should be illegal. That's my overall opinion, is that you shouldn't be able legally to discriminate. But I wouldn't be willing to concede that in the States that this doesn't go on. I mean, look at, like, there's a mafia in the States. There's mafia bars that you would never, ever go to, and they don't want you to go to, and people aren't going to them.
Travis. These clubs in Hongdae are just normal clubs. It's not a mafia bar. It's not a skinhead bar. As you mentioned, some of these people who get called out for discriminating against people, they're just, as you mentioned, perhaps normal everyday people that have foreign friends and perhaps didn't mean to cause a ruckus and just thought that what they were doing was fine, and maybe they're a little ignorant. The examples you're giving in the United States are mafia, skinheads. I mean, you can't compare these things.
You can, kind of, because it's the same kind of thing. It's like it's basically one group of people saying to another group of people that they can't do it. Now, it is protected under the law, but I would say it's a hard stretch to say that it doesn't happen in the West.
Sure.
And
sure.
So it's definitely something that's protected by the law, but there are places that aren't getting called up on this, and I think the reason they're not being called out on it, and it's not a big issue in the news, is because people would be, no journalist in their right mind would be stupid enough to go in and investigate some of these things that are going on, right? Like
I don't know about that. We could argue about this for hours. I guess the final example I want to give, somewhere that I did live, Germany. Wonderful country. Love Germany. Love the people. They're very caring, compassionate, intelligent people. I'm going to stereotype Germans right now. That's what they are. There, I'm sure, are instances that you could point to of human rights abuses or discrimination. Post World War II, they've turned things around. They had a nice 180. They're going forward. Okay, let's not look in the past, Travis. And there are some slip ups here and there, and I'm sure Germany could do even better. But if you look at Germany's stance on refugees, Germany's stance on human rights, Germany's stance on social programs to help people that are disadvantaged or are poor, blah 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 blah, versus the United States, yes. You could find instances that are shameful in both places, but when you look at one versus the other, there's a clear winner when it comes to helping people, respecting people, and promoting human rights. When you look at South Korea and when you look at some countries in the West, when it comes to discrimination against people based on their ethnicity or other things you want to throw out there, yes, there certainly are cases all the way around. But when you look at who's perhaps obviously erring a little bit more and where these things happen and nothing really seems to change, I think there's an obvious contender in there.
Who, in South Korea?
We'll leave it at that. You can make your own inferences to that, but I think it's a little different. So I appreciate you talking about this, Travis, especially after you apparently got a death threat. I'm sorry that happened.
Yeah, no problem. differing, and hopefully nothing ever comes of that. But it's certainly something I think you can experience when you're willing to put yourself out there a little bit. It's just human. You know, we've dealt with a lot of weird people on Oink in the last year and a half. So
there are a lot of weird people in Oink. Yeah,
there's a lot of weird people in the world. I mean, you're dealing with large numbers of people. There's over 7,000 people in there, so you're going to meet all kinds of interesting people on the internet.
Well, Travis, tip of the cap. I hope you'll be alive next week to record another episode with me.
Okay, sounds good. Nice to talk to you again.
You bet. Bye-bye.